the response overall has been one can only describe it as hysteria. Mm-hmm. You say it has a divide appeared. One hoped something like a divide would become manifest after the Queen had died. That's what everybody seemed to be anticipating, that, you know, the transfer of power to Charles would immediately lay bare all of the problems, you know, with monarchy, you know, historical and structural. Instead, what's happened has been just this consolidation of kind of the monarchical spirit in Britain, the traditional conformist, you know, top-down class structure of, you know, people basically touching their forelock and saluting power, so saluting their betters. The displays of, you know, mourning, the pageantry, the meretricious sentiment in the media. It's all been a matter of course. I mean, and a lot of it has been in the works. I mean, there's a lot of doubt, I would say, as to what the Queen's actual death date was. I mean, it was the case that when her father died, his death was concealed for a time so that it could be synchronized with the papers. So, so already before the Queen was dead, there were things in place, you know, people on standby. Everybody like had to follow a protocol on BBC, you know, everyone wearing black, you know, this kind of, everybody has to speak with these dejected tones, no inappropriate, you know what I mean? It's mourning. It's like I said, it's hysterical. It's just this utter atmosphere of everywhere you go, like you can't escape it. That's why I was saying, like, if only there was more of this resistance, because apparently even now, the most Republican sentiment you're going to get are from people who are quite young. I mean, even among people above 30, there is this decreasing willingness among people to actually have a professed critical position on monarchy. Most people, even if they don't, you know, they're not royalists at heart, they'll say, oh, well, it's, you know, they have sentimental feelings about the monarchy. You know, they go, oh, the Queen, she's a figurehead, and oh, don't you love the tabloidness of it all, the stories, the crown, blah, blah. People love that shit. And then they do the false stuff with that. Oh, they bring in money. This is bullshit, you know, total bullshit. But, you know, there are so many defenders of the monarchy, and not just kind of in the institutions, the culture industry, the BBC, but everywhere you go. You know, just the other day, a teacher was suspended from school for even just suggesting that pupils should be critical, should ask questions about whether or not the monarchy was necessary. You know,
is that specifically a violation of like some mourning period, or is it some other reason for the suspension?
Well, let's be clear. This mourning period is strictly a formality.
Yeah.
You know, there's no law. You know, this isn't North Korea, but it's this utter atmosphere of, you know, conformism, the social conformism of it all, kind of like this making of, you know, social pariahs. Two very popular TV presenters from Great Britain, GB in the morning. I forget their names, but they were caught trying to jump the queue to see the Queen's casket for TV, and they've been now turned into social pariahs on the media. You know, like whereas David Beckham, the famous, you know, footballer, he had this televised sort of, he appeared on TV standing in line in the crowds. It was a big media sort of stroke of genius for him, actually, because he was all over Twitter and everything because of it. Look at him there standing with the proles. You know, he's waiting for the 21 hours it takes to go see the Queen and pay his respect to Queen Madge. You know, it's everybody has been doing these media things where they come and place flowers and they do this big display of their mourning, and it's the end of an era. I mean, I'm just describing to you now basically the kind of bullshit that's going on in the UK. But no, I'm a staunch United Kingdom Republican. You know, like in the sense that, like, I don't believe in a kingdom. I don't want it to be, you know, I want to do away with the royals. You know, we got rid of the monarchy with Cromwell, you know, and then we fucking brought it back. Yeah, I mean, Cromwell himself was a tyrant. I mean, and this is a theme in history with monarchs being replaced by, I mean, just in France, you have a new Caesar, basically, a Caesarian ruler with Napoleon. And before that, even a kind of reign of terror with Robespierre and this Stalin-esque sort of dictatorship. So I mean, Cromwell was a shithead, but he had the balls to fucking get rid of the monarchy. No one else did. This is the key thing. They're not very educated people, the Windsors. I mean, they I mean, they go to like Oxford or whatever, but that's because of their family, who they know. That's not because of their academic. These people really don't fucking know anything. And they kind of poke fun at this in The Crown. The fact that the poise, the kind of Windsor patois, their way of carrying themselves is an immaculately groomed thing, but they are not very clever people. Queen Elizabeth was a bit of a constitutional scholar. She did have a diploma in this or something, but in other worldly things, history or whatever,
it's interesting, like when you watch like interviews with some of the younger ones, like Harry or whatever, like there's no indication that they, like you said, like they know anything, right? That they're really curious about anything, that they're interested in anything. From your estimate, like all the stuff that you're mentioning, the hysteria and everything else, like how much of that do you think is this sort of like manufactured media hysteria, right? Like there's like these stories ready to drop, right? And everybody's sort of like
exactly. I mean, we call ourselves a democracy, and we really lie to ourselves about how much power the crown has. It's like even sort of well-thinking, well-meaning English people will say stuff like, "Oh, the Queen, she's a figurehead. She doesn't have any say. It would be unconstitutional." Ridiculous. The amount of lobbying power the Queen has, the amount of money her family makes off of these arms deals. I mean, she's huge stake in sort of the arms trade that Britain. I mean, Britain is an arms manufacturer supreme. I mean, that's really how.
Is it ironic that like Prince Andrew, he gets in trouble for being with like trafficking victims, but prior to all this, like he's just spending an entire lifetime selling arms to like dictators all around the world, right? We know these arms are used to commit genocides and so on and so forth. Completely. And like no one says anything at all, right? This gets protected. This is like the business, right?
Exactly. I mean, they're merchants of war, and also the amount of power they have in government, in the media, and the amount of land. I mean, they are huge landowners. I mean, the duchy owns just this swathes and swathes of property, and and all under kind of like, there's always this appearance, this veneer of charity. All my trusts, I mean, I've been a resident at the Royal Drawing School in Dumfries, which is owned by Brian, and it's like, and everywhere you go, when I was just there, the pageantry just didn't stop. The narrative didn't stop. The philanthropist Charles, the Renaissance man Charles, the restorer Charles. I mean, it just was not. His sycophants were everywhere. And even while I was there, his sister flew in on a helicopter and expected everybody to kiss her ass.
Yeah, I mean, like getting back to this like idea, like a manufactured outrage. Like, do you notice like just people on the street, maybe in places that you live or places that you might visit? Like,
I live in the north, and the north. I mean, you have to understand, the north is like the south in America. Like, there's this big gap. It's a class gap. It's a cultural gap between the people who traditionally were part of the industrial parts of England and the ports, the places like London. Here, we have the historical animosity with landowners and southern politicians, Thatcher and all that sort of stuff. I mean, Huddersfield, the town I'm from, was the first town to buy itself back from its landowner. To literally buy its workers. So I mean, so that you're not. But even when the Jubilee came around, the bunting was out. The British flags, this emulation of the coronation regalia, all the like people in the streets, having like sausage rolls or something. I see it as this manufactured sort of moment of sort of solidarity. It harkens back to this idea we have of empire. right? Of course, where we used to be a superpower, right? And we used to basically believe it, and we used to basically believe in the monarchy, and it was something that people could rally around as a symbol. But
so when you get further north, people are hostile
unity in our society? What is the real the gap between rich and poor grows bigger. The crime goes up. There really is so much terrible stuff going on in our society. So I see the pageantry as this kind of moment. I mean, post Brexit, post COVID, this is just, and then again, like shiny ornaments, baubles, to distract the peasants.
Are they more hostile to the monarchy further north? Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, generally I would say so, but it's also a generational sort of thing too. I mean, I know people like who remember, the Second World War and kind of like who are like old kind of Yorkshire people, and they like the monarch. Nick's aunt is a big monarch. You go into her sitting room, it's filled with china plates with all the royals' faces on them. Teapots with the Queen on them. This is a huge thing. Like, you'll go into some households, there will be royal family memorabilia around, like on the mantelpiece, and it's really odd. It's really alienating sometimes, but also normal, banal. It's a normal part. And even they, you speak to Nick's nan, and she loves the Queen, but she hates Brian. She's like, oh, that idiot doesn't know what he's going to do when he gets on the throne. And like, you know what I mean? Like, they all have that. So it's like their precious little soap opera to them. It's very, you know what I mean? It's always been there. So it's a difficult thing to extricate for people to think in the abstract what life would be like without those fuckers. Do you know what I mean? It's so ingrained. It's literally been around for centuries. It's
kind of like, I'm guessing it has the same sort of glue function that, religion might have or whatever. But, obviously there's better things that you could do. Like I saw, for example, like I was listening to this like Jordan Peterson video about the monarchy, where first of all, he manages to say nothing at all after the death, but he was like going on and on about stuff like, well, they bring in so much money, for the UK. And that's the thing. It's like, well, don't they like own a total of like something like 30 or 40 billion dollars worth of assets, and they bring in what, like a few $100 million? You could liquidate all that, put that into like a stock index of any sort, and beat that.
It's absolutely right. This is the
just doesn't make sense.
This is the biggest myth we need to break through, I think, to argue the Republican side, the UK, the British Republican side, because like always there's this idea that kind of they are some sort of benefit to our country, like and just in that level of like what they can bring in, like in terms of capital, absolutely. I mean, they are vampires. Like they suck so much out of this country. I mean, like, and not to mention kind of like the mental chains I think they have around us. It's I do away with them, I say, but this has become so taboo to say now, and this is why I feel such weariness. It's why now when Brian is coming onto the throne, that people are more in love. Maybe it's because we're so desperate. Maybe because people really do want something, some kind of axis to rally around. Back when the Olympics happened, was it the 2012 Olympics in Britain? I mean, that was also a sort of big distraction. I mean, austerity was in full force then, and that was another thing that the newspapers, and it is a predominantly right-wing Murdoch created press in Britain, that was something that the press really latched onto as a kind of pageantry, as a kind of thing to basically flush everything out of the news. It's about, look how great everything is. Look at how wonderful Britain is. Look at these great athletes. Look at money. Look, isn't this what a booming sort of society looks like? Meanwhile, stuff like Grenfell is happening, where like tower blocks are lighting on fire and burning people alive in them. And mothers are going to food banks, to feed their children. It's another media spectacle in that traditional sense.
Yeah, the Olympics are always used in that way. I remember like in the 2008 Beijing Olympics, what they did was they, obviously they put a lot of effort, a lot of money into the sort of like, the fireworks and everything else. But to make it prettier, right, they covered literally with this like huge sheets on all the sort of like nearby, little shanty towns. Like I remember like when I was this was either in Beijing or Nanjing, when I was staying in a hotel there, and then across the street, not even across the street, it was I was able to look down into the alleyway below the hotel, and it was just like a shack where I saw like 10 people in their underwear day in, day out, and a little light that would go off, right?
Every time an Olympics comes to a city, it tears a hole in the city.
Mhm.
Absolutely tears. Like, not just the people who die kind of in the construction of these stadiums in different countries, but it absolutely, I mean, just when they were constructing the stadium in London, they were digging up old industrial sites. They leaked a ton of radium into the fucking topsoil from like these old factories that used to manufacture electric watch batteries. And like the amount of homeless people who were displaced, the amount of people who were forcibly evicted, basically, it traumatically reorganizes kind of the urban sort of environment. With always with this idea that it's going to be this magnet for capital. It's always a total red herring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a way that the Queen is itself kind of a red herring in this way. People think, oh my gosh, kind of like when instead she's a gangster robbing our purses. She's taking everything, from her. And there's also like the question of like you were saying, like these sex abuse scandals. The fact that kind of they can basically these are privileged millionaires basically running around above the law doing whatever they want to do. Speaks volumes about like the kind of people they are, the kind of the way that they hold themselves, the way that their ethical system, I suppose, what they feel they can get away with.
Were there like open protests in any way against the monarchy, or would the social costs be way too much for that to occur?
I think at different points it varies. There have been times where I would say, and it's always such a wind change where, Diana herself typified this in a way, how kind of at one point you're kind of the sacrificial lamb, another point you're kind of like the fairy tale darling. It's the caprice really of British society, kind of like, and it is a very capricious, snobby society. So, I mean, at one point, everybody kind of quite loves the royals. Another point, it's like, kind of they become like a magnet for like everything wrong in society. Mm-hmm. I mean, generally, I think, there are points where you can like point to like, say, the Queen Elizabeth I. I mean, people give her a lot of credit with being a great queen or whatever. But I mean, she did kind of live in a great time, when things are going well. You kind of are all right with the monarchs, aren't you? You're kind of like, well, you can, the Renaissance. I mean, that's not a bad time to be a monarch. But when things are going a bit shit, and when kind of everyone's poor, and when people kind of historically they're kind of looking at the monarchy, and they're looking at the royals, and they're saying kind of like, well, that there symbolizes, that epitomizes kind of the injustice of society, the injustice of my lived day-to-day experience. Why hasn't that happened yet? Why can't that happen again in Britain? Like, what are the reasons for that? And I think a lot of it's down to our media. A lot of that's down to, just our history, kind of our class history. And also, like we're saying, this weird kind of, like this decade we've been living in of kind of like hysteria, I think. So of different kinds of one crisis to the next. And it's like, the Boris government has accelerated this, the Johnson, where it's really been kind of, okay, how much exactly can we get away with? What is the limit of scandal? In a Trumpian way. It's like it's difficult though, because in a sense, Boris Johnson has no political principle. He has no ethical principle. He's only in it for himself. So at some points, he could U-turn. At one point, very famously during the COVID debacle, another situation I'm talking about here. There was a thing where the Tories, the Conservative government, were going to cancel free school meals during the lockdown, which a program where, you know, children from deprived households, and the idea was that this could be extended during lockdown so that children would, you know, could still have 3 meals a day, you know, at their homes. The Tories are going to cancel this, and there was a public outcry, you know, quite an unexpected sort of public outcry, social media mobilization, which forced the Tories to U-turn. And Boris Johnson, that's him in a nutshell. He will always bend, you know, he will always go with whatever makes him popular. These other Tories who were kind of lurking behind him, cajoling him, and now appear to be kind of stepping into the centre stage, they're the real neo-Thatcherites. They're the real, you know, milk snatchers. They are not gonna, they are not gonna care how they're viewed in the media about, like, you know, how cruel they are. And that's what worries me now with this change, this the trust government. And already in like her first week or so of you know, of being the PM, she's announced quite a lot. She's ended the cap for bankers' bonuses and another number of other things. It's just galling, you know, just how far to the right this government are prepared to keep moving. You know,
yeah,
despair.
I mean, that's the case sort of everywhere. I mean, with the exception of, you know, with the exception of some, I guess you could call them mildly liberal provisions in Biden's like various packages, everything is like very much like a rightward shift. I mean, I remember what the promises were back in 2020, right, when Democrats were running, and just how, you know, this kind of like last ditch effort to do well again in the polls, right? They you know, they did the student debt forgiveness as a kind of like bare minimum. I forget, even maybe it was even he forgave less debt than was promised in the platform. But I mean, it's always like, you know, everything seems to be heading more and more in that direction, right? The idea
the right will go back to its traditional base always. The left increasingly will not go to its base in socialism. It will not go to, you know, its base in Marxism. It will not go into whereas the right are completely willing to do that, to go for issues of immigration, you know, sexual rights, all these other things. The left will not go for redistribution. The left will not go for any of these topics, and it's just, yeah, perpetually frustrating that we have these defanged leftist moves. I mean, Keir Starmer epitomizes this move by the left wing British Labour movement to move back to Blairism, to move back to new Labour, which is what, laissez-faire capitalism. Fuck that. You know, that's what got us in this fucking mess. You know, like you know.
I was recently reading Alexander Dugin's The Fourth Political Theory. So Alexander Dugin was someone that, you know, I'm not sure if like it's you could simply say like, oh, he's in the media, like he's the brain of Putin, right? Because in the 90s, he wrote this book called Foundation of Geopolitics, which is more or less kind of like the way that Russia, the recommendations there was somewhat what Russia more or less behaved as in the coming decades. But one thing that I appreciated in this book that he wrote, this is from 2009, is when he discusses the 3 political theories. To him, it's liberalism, fascism, and Marxism. When he discusses liberalism, he does not differentiate between someone, for example, like a Joe Biden and a Donald Trump, right? To him, it's all the same thing, right? And more and more, right, I'm kind of like seeing how exactly this is the case. Like, well, I mean, first of all, in terms of foreign policy, right, it really doesn't matter who's in power for the most part, right? There are some exceptions, right? You could say maybe one party will start this kind of war, another party might start another kind of war, but generally speaking, you know, 2003, 2002, Bush starts his wars. In the 2010s, Hillary Clinton convinces Obama to turn what is supposed to be, you know, an intervention in a civil war in Libya to something else altogether. You know, so it's like it's its own kind of like level of corruption and stupidity. So the fact that, you know, there are sort of people that are watching this and looking at it from the outside and saying, really these are the same strains. I think it's very useful for people to view things precisely in, you know, in this way, because I mean, what really is the difference, right? Like, it's true that Democrats won't really cut taxes, but they won't do anything when the taxes do get cut by the previous president, right? I mean, there's no difference really now in the tax regime now versus Donald Trump, right? Like, I sort of saw this was coming. And anyway, you know, like
and it's like, what can you believe as well? Because Labour were just saying, like I just said, in my country, the Tories have taken off the cap for bankers' bonuses, and Labour are saying that that's something that they could correct when and if they get into power. And I'm like, no, you fucking won't. I mean, for fuck's sake. I mean, Keir Starmer again, who is the chief of the opposition, you know, the shadow cabinet. He's an ex-lawyer, you know. I mean, like you were saying, liberals for me, kind of, they are the party of the status quo. It's the ejection of real politics. They're getting rid of the real issues and just kind of trying to kind of manage everything. And this, it's like, I mean, I think that's what the previous Labour governments tried to do, you know, with Brown and Blair, and it's I mean, facilitated to a great degree kind of the crises that we're experiencing now. I mean, you know, the crash in 2008 kind of is the biggest like a metaphor for this, kind of like, you know, like, oh, we'll give control to the bankers, and like, bankers fuck it up. Oh well, you know, don't do it again.
Do you personally vote? And if you do you typically vote for one of the two parties or no?
I don't vote.
Okay.